In just over a week, legal recreational pot will mean changes for police on the job. But departments are also having to consider what their officers should be allowed to do on their own time.
We trust our employees, and we looked at the policies surrounding prescription use, alcohol use, and we really don't have an issue here.
The Vancouver Police Department is taking the same approach to recreational cannabis as it does to alcohol. Officers won't be told what they can and can't do while they're not at work, but they're required to show up fit for duty. Other police forces across the country, though, are introducing more restrictive policies. The RCMP is looking at banning officers from using recreational cannabis for 28 days before a shift. Today, Toronto Police announced it's their policy.
We've made the decision based on the role that our officers play in protecting community safety. And right now, the science tells us that you can be impaired and or have the effects of cannabis up to 28 days of use.
The Calgary Police Department goes even further. If officers are trained to use firearms and can be called in for active duty, they can't use ever. Their union expects challenges to the policy.
I've even had members approach me that have said, I'm not even planning on using, but I don't think it's fair for my employer to tell me what I'm going to do on my own time.
It doesn't help that there are no common guidelines for all forces.
And that's what they mean by fitness for duty.
This criminologist believes having inconsistent policies can lead to confusion.
It raises questions about the reliability of some of these limitations, because the circumstances of policing, the experiences of the environment of policing are not that different from one city to another.
But as it stands, the rules for police officers will differ. Just because recreational pot will be legal for Canadian adults, it doesn't mean that everyone will be allowed to partake. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
As Briar just mentioned there, each police force is going at it their own way. So how are they coming to those conclusions? Jason Bussa researches the effects of cannabis at McMaster University, and he is in Toronto tonight. Good to see you, Jason. So the Toronto police say its officers can't use cannabis for 28 days before reporting for duty. There are some other police forces toying with that number as well. Where do you think that number may have come from?
Well, it's difficult to know where that number comes from, but there must be some kind of test or assay that they're using to detect the presence of cannabis in an officer's system. The THC is broken down into metabolites, which can be detected in urine, for example. And because THC is stored in fat cells, it can slowly leach out into the system long after the effects of the high have passed, and can be detected, depending on the test you use, for days and even up to weeks. So they may be looking at some type of test that's focusing more on the metabolites or the breakdown products of cannabis as opposed to the actual effects it might be having on an officer.
Okay, so it might not be that you're high for 28 days, because that doesn't sound right. But how long does THC typically stay in a person's body, and does it leave them impaired for a long period of time?
Well, depending on how they take it in, whether they smoke it, inhale it, or ingest it, the potency of the product, how much THC it has in it, which is the psychoactive component, right, the individual's metabolism, these things will all play a part in how long it stays in your system. But in terms of the actual high that you feel, that euphoria, if you inhale or smoke cannabis, that lasts anywhere from 1 to 3 hours on average. If you ingest the product through an edible, it might be 4 to 6 hours, depending on how much you have in your stomach when you take in the product. But you're quite right. The idea that you would remain impaired for a period of 28 days or even a matter of days is simply untenable.
Okay, I only have about 30 seconds, but how worried are you at this stage about people coming into work with cannabis still in their system? And do you think that what we're seeing from police is really more about liability?
I suspect that it is more the latter. I think that there's been a lot of products out there, a lot of substances that people can take in, whether it's a glass of beer, a glass of wine, that have the potential to impair you. And certainly I think most officers handle that responsibility. They do what they do on their time off. It doesn't affect what they do at work. So I'm not overly concerned that they might have a metabolite in their system. What I would be concerned about is they might come in impaired. Certainly a 28-day time span seems excessive for that.
Okay, Jason Bussa, thank you very much for your time tonight. I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
It's not just police forces grappling with this issue. Just today, WestJet informed its workforce that anyone in safety-sensitive positions will be banned from marijuana use, even when they're not at work. Air Canada had announced a similar policy. How about firefighters? Well, Toronto Fire says it's not changing its policies, that employees are strictly prohibited from showing up to work impaired. Vancouver adds that you can't take any impairing substance 4 hours before a shift. And some are still trying to come up with a policy, like the Canada Border Services Agency, Correctional Service of Canada, and NAV Canada, which runs Canada's air navigation system.